I figured we'd have like a low attendance or something today because you knew where we were going. You knew we were tracking, and the good thing and the bad thing with verse-by-verse teaching, again, is I have to address the issues at hand because they're right in front of me. And that's the hard part. The good thing is you can't say, hey, you knew I was coming, so you singled this out for me. I didn't, Jesus did. It happens to be right where we're going, right? Turn with me to Matthew chapter 19. Let's take off beginning in verse 1. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished these sayings that he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And great multitudes followed him, and he healed them there. The Pharisees also came to him, testing him and saying to him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Verse 4, and he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. And so he's departed from the region of Galilee. He's moving south to the region of Judea. And there's a shift in geography as Jesus has been ministering in and around the region of Galilee for the last 3 chapters that we've seen. But there's also a major shift toward Jesus' goal, toward his final destination, which is Jerusalem and the cross. That was his destination. While at Caesarea Philippi, just north of the Sea of Galilee, as you recall, he pulled away, kind of a private little retreat with his disciples, and he began to tell them things of his future, kind of predicting, prophesying, sharing, revealing to them that he is going to go to Jerusalem. I must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things by the hands of the religious leaders, die, and raise again on the 3rd day. And here in chapter 19, he's making his ascent to that pivotal, painful, powerful place by heading along the Jordan River down to Judea. And as he gets down there, these great multitudes, we're told, followed him. And he healed them there. I mean, he's been doing this frequently. As the multitudes would gather, he would preach to them and he would heal them. But why mention it here? I think Matthew points this out to us who have been following along so we can get the understanding of his popularity, that his power wasn't limited to Galilee. We saw in Nazareth, he didn't do many miracles because of lack of faith, we're told, in Nazareth. But here in the region abroad, people have heard, they've seen, they're watching, they're wanting what he has to offer them, all of it, albeit some of it surface level, some of it genuine. This is why in the midst of this crowd, as he's in Judea, he is confronted by the crowd, but with the crowd, kind of sown in the crowd, like up in Galilee, as we saw before, the Pharisees also came to him, testing him. They said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? They bring to Jesus a topic and a problem that was just as difficult in that day as it is in ours: marriage and divorce. See, in Jesus' day, there were 2 main schools of thought centered around 2 of its most famous proponents. The first was a school of Rabbi Shammai, a more strict, conservative, unpopular view. The second was from the school of Rabbi Hillel, who was a more lax, liberal, and really a popular view. The conservative was the unpopular, and the liberal was the popular view. Sounds a lot like today. William Barclay tells us that under the thinking of Hillel, which was the liberal viewpoint on marriage and divorce, a man could divorce his wife if she spoiled his dinner, spoke disrespectful of his parents, or if she raised her voice in an argument and can be heard from the next house. Rabbi Akiba even went to the length of saying that a man could divorce his wife if he found a woman who he liked better or considered more beautiful. That sounds a lot like today also. And so here they come. They're presenting this to Jesus, right? They're testing him. That's how they're testing him, in case you were wondering, right? I mean, where is he going to side? Where is he going to fall? Is he going to fall on this side with Hillel on the popular vote? Right? Is he going to side with Shammai, the unpopular but very conservative and biblical, according to the Mosaic law standpoint? Is he going to side with what authority will Jesus lean on? Who will he trust and lean on? Well, if he agreed with the lax scholar of Hillel, it was clear that Jesus didn't take the law of Moses very seriously, right? So what kind of spiritual leader is this, right? If he agreed with the strict school of Rabbi Shammai, then Jesus might become unpopular with the multitudes who kind of like the convenience of an easy divorce. So how does he answer? Right, as they confront him there. He's on the way to the cross, on the way to Jerusalem, and they're confronting with this as decisions are being made or forming of who this man was. Jesus will now take them back to the very beginning, back to God's ideal for marriage. I love this. This wasn't just another man's opinion. You know, I wonder what he believes. I wonder what they believe. It's not just another man's opinion, but it's God's opinion, our word, his authority. You see, through the years, I have had the privilege of doing lots of premarital counseling and lots of marriage counseling. And from time to time, couples will come in and meet with me, and I'll start sharing with them, and I'll get into the counseling session, and the couples get absolutely irritated and frustrated with me because I'm going to the Word of God. Well, let me see, what does the Bible say about this? And I'll go, well, we didn't come here to hear the Bible. We came here to hear what you have to say about this. What they're saying is, why can't you share some psychology with me, what you learned in school in psychology? Well, I could do that, but it wouldn't help you very much. You know, it wouldn't really help you in the long run. Why? Because, well, you see, why not go to the one who created marriage, right? Oh, I think you can glean from human behavior. I don't say throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we can glean from it. Solomon did, and gave us great wisdom in it. Yeah, I think we can learn from it. I think we can glean from it. But it shouldn't be our authority on what schools say and what men say. Our authority should be in the Word of God. Who else knows more about marriage than the one who designed, engineered, and created it? I mean, it is a divine institution that is under attack. All right? It was as if you could think of the heaven of heavenlies, and you could think that God went into his workshop sometime before the foundation of the world. However you can, imagine this in your head. I do it more like the Wile E. Coyote kind of thing, but I'm sure it's much more, reverent than that. But he goes into he pulls out his on his work desk, his workbench, and he's got the blueprints out for the atom, light. Let's make light today. He's got the blueprint out, and he saw man and he saw woman, and he said, I've got just the design for this. And he created marriage. We wouldn't have made that up. And if you've been married 20 years ago, I wouldn't have made that up. Not at all. Just wouldn't have even come to my mind, right? All right? And it's a divine institution. It's one that is under siege and it's under attack. Constantly you see it. We read in verse 4 that he answered and he said, well, have you not read He who made them at the beginning made them male and female and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined together with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but they're one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. I mean, Jesus is using, in hermeneutical circles, what is known as the law of first mention. Man, when it's first mentioned, we go back to that, right? He goes back to where it was first mentioned. This is and was the Lord's ideal for marriage. It's God's institution, not man's. Let's examine his four-part answer. Marriage's origin, its composition, its purpose, and its obligation. Number one, this was the original design. In the beginning, from the blueprints, it was the original design. He said marriage, okay? He designed it, and in the beginning, this is the way it was. You know, it was before it was tampered with, before it was tweaked, before it was perverted by sin because the fall happened, right? But in the beginning, this was God's design. Number two, this is composition. Marriage was comprised of man and woman. I didn't write this. I know this is a very unpopular view today, but I didn't know Jesus wrote this. I mean, he's the Word. The Word became, anyways, he wrote this, that it was comprised of man and woman. No matter what mankind says or how we redefine it, God's design for marriage was for, he says, male and female. And it was perfect. By his design from the beginning, that's the way it was, Jesus says. And number three, its purpose. What was its purpose? Oneness. Man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. The man should forsake his singleness and even his own parents to become one with his wife. And I believe that can be used mutually too, as the women will do the same thing. I mean, this is intimate, right? That they are leaving and cleaving and becoming one. Sure, there's no other time that a husband and wife is demonstrating oneness than that intimate act of sexual activity. I get that, right? It's intimate, but it's way beyond the realm of physical intimacy. In the Hebrew, the word for flesh, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, become one flesh. And the Hebrew goes beyond the physical to mean also soul. There's this intermingling or this mingling of souls you actually find in the original language. I mean, there's this mingling together of a husband and wife. You see them as they grow together. It's pretty amazing. It can also be very painful. Now, guys, this is one of the most common reasons for problems in marriages today. And one of the hardest and ongoing lessons that I have to keep learning and relearning and relearning and relearning. And I'm going on, 18 years of relearning and the becoming one with my wife, oneness, which forces me to die to myself. Over and over and over. When a pastor told me one time, and I was a brand new married young man, and I heard a pastor teaching one time, he said, marriage is the ultimate dying to yourself. I thought, this man's crazy. I married the hottest woman who's just so freaking awesome and dying to myself. This guy is crazy, right? That's what I said. I thought marriage isn't dying to yourself. 15 years later, I said, amen, brother. And I'm still married to the hottest, most intelligent, incredible woman who's got my back, so you can look out for me on Facebook. Don't mess with her. She's all like 120 pounds, but she can break bad. It's hard. We begin to learn we have to die to our emotions, my feelings, my needs. What about my needs, right? I have to die to myself. He's not doing what he's to do. She's not doing. I have to die to myself because there were no longer two, just hanging out, partnering in life. We're one. And he goes on to say, and let no man separate. But I believe that you can place just about anything in that blank. Let nothing separate. Let not man separate, but you can place, let nothing. I have men who have been in my office through the years, women who have been in my office, and no, we're getting a divorce. Why? Because I will not quit smoking pot. What? You're going to let grass, who makes you think funny? And I go, well, how do you know? Trust me, I know. It makes you think funny. You're going to let that get in the way of what God brought together? Oh, what a heartbreak. You're going to let your job get in front of your marriage? There's a man that I admire so much. I miss him and his family. He's in Cannon right now. He's a combat controller. And this man, one day I remember years ago, he was being deployed. He was gone a lot. And those guys can't tell you where they're going, what they're doing. They just to go. And there's major, major duress on a family having to deal with that. And his wife was having a nervous breakdown. She just couldn't take it anymore. Well, this man, you know what he did? He came stateside and he got out. He left the military under duress to be with his wife. I couldn't believe it. I was blown away. You have strived so hard to make this. Combat controllers are very elite operators. To get there, you are very elite. And to make it the way he's made it and to do accomplish what he's accomplished and then to say, my wife is more important. He left it and to be with his wife. Well, and God blessed them, and through the year, they ended up going to China. We're missionaries, and that's what special operators do when they get out. They go to China, right? And so God healed their marriage, healed them in such a beautiful way. And then, there was a freedom. God said, I want you to go back in the military. And his wife was totally good with it. Healed her, healed them. And by the act of God, he's a combat controller now. And hence why he's in Cannon, a lovely place on the planet. So I hear. And but God met him and he honored him. Let not anything separate you. Your kids, your finances, right? Pretty heavy word here. The two would become one. And the fourth is spiritually binding. It's contractual. What God has joined together, Jesus also reminded the Pharisees that marriage is spiritually binding before God. Marriage is not merely a social contract. And as God has joined, he expects man to honor what he has joined and to keep marriage together. When the Pharisees, then they kind of responded to his answer. They responded with a legal question, taken up in verse 8 here. Verse 7, and then said to him, why then did Moses, the Pharisee said in verse 7, why did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? And he said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. Why did Moses command them to give a certificate of divorce, they ask? And the Pharisees wrongly assumed that God commanded divorce where there was uncleanness. And Jesus identifies that uncleanness as sexual immorality. The rabbinic saying of that day went, if a man has a bad wife, it is his religious duty and obligation to divorce her. But Jesus noted that difference between command and permitted here. God never commands divorce, but he permitted it. Because of the hardness of your hearts, he permitted you to divorce. Jesus answered by saying that the law of Moses made provision for divorce, not because God desired it, but because of hard hearts. Because of hard hearts, the Lord permitted it, but with prescribed boundaries, unfaithfulness, sexual immorality. And unfaithfulness or adultery carried with it far greater ramifications than divorce in that day. It was death. I mean, Deuteronomy 22 says that if anyone's caught in the act of adultery, that you bring them outside the gate and you stone them to death. So the law was pretty heavy about adultery, way beyond just divorce, right? But Jesus brought mercy here. John 1:17 tells us that for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. I mean, do you guys remember this notable story in John chapter 8 when Jesus was confronted once again? He's by, no doubt religious leaders who are testing him, and they bring this woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, and they threw her down at his feet. Do you remember that story? And we talk about it from time to time because it's such a moving, powerful story. And they said, hey, Moses commanded us to stone her, to kill her because she was caught in the act of adultery. What says you, Jesus? Right? Right? Loving Savior, sweetie pie. What says you? Hoping to just really trap him because then he's going to have to say, well, the law does say that. But instead he pulls this, pulls something out of his hat. It's pretty amazing. He says, Yes. He said, well, you know what? And he kneels down, begins writing in the sand and says, well, okay, let the first one of you who has no sin, let one of you with no sin throw the first stone at her. Go ahead. It's a Randy paraphrase version, guys, but you get it. Let the first one of you have no sin, stone her, right? And he begins writing in the sand, and we speculate he's writing their sins out, in detail. Jacobus, remember this date, Woo, okay, I gotta go, right? And so they one by one begin to leave. No one, they have rocks ready, and they're like dropping their rocks. They're kind of like, okay. So they begin walking off, and pretty soon they're all gone. And Jesus kind of looks at the woman and goes, where are your accusers? Where are your accusers? And she's like, I guess I have none. Well, neither do I. Be of good cheer. Go and sin no more. Don't do it again. Not don't go get caught again. Get smarter with it. No. Go and sin no more. Right? There was so much mercy and so much grace that was found in this woman caught in the act of adultery. So we see that. We see this beautiful grace in the Lord's eyes. And to this permission for divorce also, the Apostle Paul added, kind of moving on, added the case of abandonment to unbelieving spouse. Sexual immorality, but Paul also says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 15, 1 Corinthians 7:15, but if the unbeliever departs, let him depart a brother or a sister. I screwed that up. But if the unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. Right? Kind of another permission there. And Jesus goes even further, however, and this is probably the heaviest passage here. It goes further to say in verse 9, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. I've heard it said that marriage is like the army. Everyone complains, but you'd be surprised at the large number of people who re-enlist. They complain, and they re-enlist. Complain, re-enlist. Look, to me, it's heartbreaking for me to see couples throw in the towel after 5, 10, and 20 years. Just heartbreaking. Thinking that they're going to find the next relationship better or easier. And most of the time, I'll say, it's a mirage on the horizon, if that was the heart. I'm going to get rid of this one, get the next one. It's a mirage. The other models look beautiful out there. But when you get them, it's the same old. You're going to have to deal with yourself eventually and die to yourself eventually, right? They have seen God do amazing works and heal people. We'll talk about that in a minute. And bring great relationships into folks' life later. But the reason why a person who does not have a legitimate divorce commits adultery upon remarrying is because that they are not divorced in the eyes of God. And since their old marriage was never dissolved on biblical grounds, that marriage is still valid. And they're actually guilty of bigamy and adultery and bringing someone else into it. Jesus was even more conservative than Shammai because of this. Kind of threw him for a curve. Whoa. And unabashed about it, too. This is a super, super hard teaching. But it shows us how serious marriage is. And that it is a promise made to God, to our spouse, to the world, that it's a binding promise and cannot be broken with our own discretion. If God does not recognize the promise being broken, well, then it's not. Right? Abuse often comes up as a question. Can a person divorce another because of abuse? I mean, the Bible doesn't really, doesn't say so. But I believe that those who are being abused should seek counsel and quickly separate from that abuser. Quickly get out of that situation. And the Lord can do some amazing things in healing and restoring. The Lord doesn't expect you to endure such suffering. But one thing I have to add, before moving on, some people in churches get so dogmatic about this passage that they let it define, disqualify, and exclude many great men and women from ministry and from leadership. And I think it's just a shame. It doesn't say that this is the unpardonable sin. People fail. They make poor decisions and later find themselves surrendering to the Lord, right? I mean, it happens. I mean, think about the most famous marital failure in the scripture, or if not all history. David and Bathsheba, right? Remember that guy? Man, he should be at battle. He's not. He's on his rooftop. Man, there's a girl bathing down there. And she's evidently pretty incredibly good looking, right? So he sees her, he takes her, he sleeps with her, she gets pregnant, and she's married. So he's like, oh, so he has her husband killed in battle. Husband's out of the way, she's pregnant, I'll be the hero, take her in, marry her, I'll have the baby, take care of that baby that's really mine, right? And then God said, I don't think so. Sends Nathan. Nathan kind of intervenes, deals with the situation. And he finds himself just broken. Man, he's broken. He humbles himself. You read a lot of the Psalms on this. He wasn't a perfect man. He made mistakes. He failed. He made relational mistakes. Failed. But, and it cost him his first child, really. It was a pretty heavy consequence. But his second child, from that same woman, Bathsheba, God blessed. Solomon was born. And Solomon became one of the greatest kings in Israel, if not all times. And from Solomon and through Solomon came Jesus, our Messiah, through his line. Pretty heavy. The Lord can still use those who failed in this area. And Jesus restores, he renews, he reveals himself to us imperfect people every day. So let's recognize, in recap, let's recognize the seriousness of marriage, right? It's to be taken super serious and not get bogged down with this passage and dogmatic with it. The disciples, they were blown away by this. I mean, really, they were reeling from it. Whoa, that serious that if you leave your spouse and then they remarry, they're committing it? What? Whoa, they're blown away. We're told in verse 10 that they respond. His disciples said to him, if such is the case for a man and his wife, it's better not to marry. But he said to them, all cannot accept this saying. Only those whom it has been given. And Jesus says in verse 12, for there are eunuchs who were born thus from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He who is able to accept this, let him accept it. So, man, if this is the case, the disciples say it's better that man should not marry. Wow. It's like Hotel California. No, they didn't say that, but I'm thinking, wow. You can check out anytime you like, but you never leave. That's really kind of divorce too, when you think about it, if you have kids. The disciples understood Jesus' teaching on marriage and divorce very, very clearly. They understood that it was not a commitment to be entered into quickly or lightly, and considered that since marriage is so binding before God, then maybe it's better not to marry. Now, I used to do premarital counseling with my wife. When she was on staff with me at Coastline Gulf Breeze, we did marriage counseling. We did a lot of premarital counseling. We did premarital counseling together. And I think there's a couple here I saw that was in one of our counseling sessions, maybe a couple. And it was a great thing, except for when I'd leave and she'd say, well, you need to apply that. I hated that part. Like, you're not coming to the next one, kind of thing. But one time I left this premarital counseling session. Unfortunately, this is kind of what would happen. Sometimes I would have a marriage counseling, and then have the couple of premarital waiting for me in the office, like in the office foyer, waiting room. And so I would say goodbye to the marriage couple, and the premarital come in. I don't really advise that from pastors because that can be bad, right? And so what I would do is I would come in from a bed, and I would kind of pour into this young couple getting married, going, "Woo! You better look out, because marriage ain't what you think it is, right? Because I would love to introduce that last couple, but for anonymity purposes, I can't do that. But woo, And I remember one time I left this counts premarital with Dawn, and Dawn was kind of short with me, and I remember she said, "Wow, Randy," he's like, "you should probably lighten up a bit. I mean, you're going to scare them away. Marriage isn't that bad, and I mean, so along those lines." And I was like, "Well, yeah, you're right. It is." She was right as usual, but I had to kind of lighten up, but yet at the same time, take it very, very, very seriously, because young couples romanticize marriage so often, right? And Jesus says, "You're right, guys. Hey, disciples, all cannot accept this saying, but only those whom it's been given." And Jesus recognized that celibacy is good for some, for the one who is able to accept it, such as Jesus himself or even the Apostle Paul. When I was a young Christian, I learned from bad relationships. I got saved when I was 19 out of the world, just hardcore world, and got saved, and I learned right off the bat about bad relationships with women. I learned that my God was a jealous God, right? And so, but I also I wasn't one of these who could do this. I needed a spouse, right? It's not good for Randy to be alone. Right? And so I needed this. And I would often pray to God. I would say, "Oh God, would you please, Lord, would you give me the gift of celibacy?" But I'd always preface, "for a season." Right? Right. I didn't want him to miss that part, right? "Can you give me the gift of celibacy for a season, Lord? Just for a season," And he met me, and he blessed me in a beautiful way, and gave me patience, and to where then he brought, my Eve to me and presented her to me in that timing, and it was beautiful. My Eve, Dawn Eve, right? My first wife, and my last. But Jesus, he goes on to tell us that there are three types of eunuchs. There are those who are born without the capacity for sex or marriage. Right? This is also figuratively speaking as a eunuch too, right? Not just physically, but yeah, those who are born that way. But also some are born without the desire to be married. I meet those men and I marvel. I marvel at that. Really? Are you serious? I just don't understand it. I can't comprehend it. But they're like, "Oh, seriously, There are some who are born that way," Jesus said. The first guy. There are some who are made that way by others. Right? I mean, in those days, they would capture a nation, and they would take them in, and they would oftentimes castrate them so they wouldn't breed, right? Kind of put an end to their breeding, but also castrate them and bring them to a place of important office around the harem, the king's harem. I mean, the king has a bunch of wives and, and such. He doesn't want anyone, with any hanky-panky going on. So, he usually takes those servants and, they can't do any hanky-panky, right? He castrates them. And that they're safe in the house, Daniel and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, the prophet Daniel, he was most likely a eunuch. He was under the head eunuch. He was in the place with with old Nebi in the palace. Right? He was trusted with things, and so he was most likely made a eunuch by man. So there's some who are born that way, just no capacity, or they don't have the parts when they were born, or they were made that way by others. But then there are those who choose to live without sex in marriage for the kingdom of heaven's sake. They have the capacity, maybe even the interest, but yet they choose for the sake of the kingdom and heaven's sake that they're not going to. The Apostle Paul was like this. And if you can study 1 Corinthians 7, you see he lays it out pretty clearly, actually encouraging us that if you can remain single, to do it, that it's actually, it's advantageous for the gospel, he says, that if you can do this. And the reason he says is because, as a married man, your first priority is to take care of your wife, to take care of your children, right? That's my first priority. I have to take care of my wife and my children. And then you guys come second. Guys, sorry, but you're second to Dawn and the kiddos. So that's kind of what the order of things, and that's a God-given order that he's given me, right? And so the Apostle Paul said, I don't have to worry about that. Man, I can go where I want to go, when I want to go. I don't have to worry about this and worry about that. There's nothing bogging him down, keeping him from moving forward, and they can't use anything against him. The world can't, right? But I will go on to, and note, please, because whenever I say, I believe that you never add to the scripture, right? This is a Randy opinion. I believe that it's advantageous for the kingdom that if God's given you the desire to marry, that you wait for God and marry that perfect person, and that you will be so infectious to the world, that you will be so impacting to the world if you love your wife the way you husbands need to love your wife. If wives, you respect your husbands and you yield to their leadership in the home, as God has asked you and expects you to do. That if the husbands and the wives do that, man, there is going to be such a harmony in that marriage, and the world is going to look on. In Ephesians chapter 5, God uses that as a treatise for marriage. Right? Compares church and Jesus to the bride and the groom, right? Because it's the picture of the gospel. The world looks on and goes, wow, how on earth have you married 20 years? This is my fourth. How on earth are you happy? How on earth are you satisfied? How on earth? And they ask you those questions and you go, trust me, it ain't me. I'd have been done a long time ago. It's a threefold cord. It's not easy broken. It's Jesus. Jesus is not just the reason for the season. He's the reason for the pleasing in my marriage, in my parenting. Because you can disciple everyone in the world, but no one's a disciple like your children. Your children are watching. Your children are learning, right? There's no one quite like the disciple of a child. And they're going to go forth and propagate the things that they've learned from you. It's beautiful and awesome, or it's freaking scary. Huh? Which I think perfectly lends into this our closing passage for today. In verse 13, he says, then little children were brought to him that he might lay hands on them and pray, but the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and departed from there. Really, when it comes to marriage and divorce, the children are the greatest victims. Man, I think that's what Satan's targeting more than anything. is our children, because if he's got our children, he's got the next generation and the next, right? So I don't think this is a coincidence that's here. Then little children were brought to him. How incredible is it that in the midst of these hard teachings on marriage and divorce, that parents brought their children to be blessed by Jesus. There's no coincidence that this passage falls right in sync with Jesus' teaching here. You know, you could see this. You know, he's teaching. Well, it was a common thing in that day. It was around the Passover feast. We're moving towards it here in timeline-wise. And so then we have the parents from traveling from all over would be coming to Jerusalem. And it was customary around the Passover time that they would bring their children and to be blessed by the rabbis. Well, we do children dedications here. Love that. One of the most special things that we do, I think. And, they would bring them to rabbis, and the rabbis would lay hands on them and pray for them and bless them. That was what laying hands was about. And so they were coming, and here's Jesus teaching this really heavy message, and he maybe has a pause. Maybe he wasn't done. I don't know. Maybe he had a pause in his speaking, about marriage and divorce, and lo and behold, parents started pushing their way through the crowd, and they got little Ezekiel coming in, little Zeke, they are carrying little Zeke probably and saying, hey, excuse me, we want the rabbi to pray, and you could see Peter and the guys are running guard, they're like, no further questions. No further questions. Jesus is off limits right now. Nope, can't see him right now. They're kind of running guard. Maybe they're hungry, right? I don't know. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. They're going to be praying for kids for hours now, And so whatever the reason, they're running guard, defending. And Jesus is like, what? Move over, Peter. Get out of the way, Peter. Hey, Zeke, let me see that little thing. Little bundle of joy holding that little thing. It probably stunk because they didn't have Pampers. Right? But man, just loving that little pamperless baby and holding it. If you go to Haiti, it's like that. You're like, oh, wow, yeah. He's a cutie. Wet, too, And maybe he was doing that, he's holding me. He said, wait, such is the kingdom of heaven. I just taught you guys this, a couple chapters ago, remember? I didn't say that, but, I just talked to you about coming to the kingdom. This is it. Look at this little baby, how dependent it is. Oh, this is what we are to the Father, and just, right? And don't keep these kids for me, right? You could just see that taking place. Now, I never encourage people to get married because they get pregnant. Oh, that's controversial. Oh, what are you talking about, Pastor? That's not American. You've got obligations and responsibilities. And oh man, I don't think that's a reason to get married. You messed up, right? You messed up. Don't make it worse, right? If you love each other, man, if you think that you're mature enough to do that, man, I never encourage people to get married because they're pregnant. Marriage is so hard. People often resent their children because of it. Seen it. But I always encourage people to stay married for their children's sake. Always. I mean, these beautiful little things are very resilient. Sure, things can happen and they can bounce. They're very resilient. But they're also very observant and very absorbent. They soak everything up. They learn from us. They emulate our attitudes and our actions. My little boy turned 3 yesterday, my youngest. And it's amazing. And I was talking to another father the other day at the Warrior Ride. It was just pretty cool last Friday. It came in. One of the Warriors there came in on a bike. We were talking about parenting and such. And it was so true. He said, I was looking at my little boy the other day, and he started doing something that I didn't like. Mama didn't like the way he was acting. And he said, and it was me. It's like I was looking in the mirror. The revelation that we have as parents when we see our kids. Sometimes they're the cutest little things. I got that from me. Yeah, that's right. Cute little booger, right? But then there's things we don't want to claim, right? There's things like, oh, you didn't get that from me. But your wife is like, that's you. Spin an image, right? There's things like that you see, you go, whoa. They're little sponges. They act and they react to us. They emulate us. And it's scary. And I believe that the most important responsibility we have as parents is bringing our children to Jesus. That's what they were doing. These guys were bringing their children to Jesus. In school, sports, patriotism, these are all super important aspects of life, but they should come last in priority to Jesus. But what does it look like to bring our children to Jesus? Well, we do it in our marriage. We do it in our marriage. I mean, showing them. I show my little boys how to love mama. Hey, this is Jesus. This is what Jesus told me to do. And this is what, I'm going to love mama. They're going to catch us kissing, canoodling. I mean, PG stuff, right? Hopefully, because then it gets really weird and a lot of explaining to do. But then, right? And so, but they're going to see me showing affection. They're going to see me coming in and trying to help mama, right? I know I got a lot of work to do there, right? But but they're going to see me emulating Jesus to them. They are learning how to be daddy, is what they're learning, right? They're going to see me going, "Hey, I messed up. I'm sorry, Don, you're right." They're going to see me apologizing. They're going to see me leading. No, we're going to do this. No, we're making this decision. Oh, yeah. And your mama said that? I'm with her. Inside, I may not agree, but I am with her on this. We are a team. Go behind closed doors. I don't agree with that. Why did you do that? I think that's just too hard, mama, because she's a disciplinarian, a hard way. Tough German mama raised her, Like, but I'm going to stick with her. We're a team. I can show Jesus to my children in my marriage. When we do it in our relationships, how I treat others around me, I'm showing Jesus to them. In our jobs, how to be upright, ethical in my job. As they get older, they start learning more and seeing more than we give them credit for. My recreational endeavors, what I put as priorities, I'm showing Jesus to them. And in our church, finally, I'm showing Jesus to my boys, the church. You know what? They see that they're important. I make it, they are important. And when I show them that they are more important than the church, I love them and I'm going to pour out for them. Right? When they see that, they see their importance. So when the church calls, when ministry calls me out at night and late nights, in the middle of the night, and 6 days a week and 7 days a week at times, because I have shown them that they're important and I love them, they understand, they accept it. And they see that church is important. And they grew up believing church is important. Right? I show them both. If we bring them to Jesus, he'll lay hands on them and bless them in ways that we could never imagine. We could never imagine.